Pablo Picasso's relationships with women formed one of the most powerful, volatile, and enduring engines behind his creativity, shaping not only the emotional landscape of his life but also the trajectory of modern art itself. To understand Picasso's personal world is to navigate a terrain of passion, conflict, admiration, domination, tenderness, cruelty, fascination, and dependency, a vast emotional architecture that fed directly into his relentless artistic evolution. His partners were not footnotes to his biography, they were the architects of entire stylistic revolutions, each marking the beginning and end of distinct artistic eras, each leaving an imprint visible in the lines, colors, distortions, and symbolic vocabularies that define Picasso's work. From his earliest adult years, Picasso possessed an almost magnetic intensity, charismatic, mercurial, and intellectually demanding, qualities that drew women toward him while also creating emotional storms around him. His relationships rarely followed predictable patterns. They were fluid, layered, overlapping, and often combustible, reflecting both Picasso's restless temperament and his conviction that emotional upheaval was integral to artistic vitality. He needed intimacy but resisted stability, he sought inspiration but feared stagnation. This paradox, repeated with different women across decades, became one of the central dramas of his life. The story begins with Fernande Olivier, his first long-term partner and a figure of profound importance during the Rose period. Fernande, vibrant and introspective, lived among the Bohemians of Montmartre even before Picasso arrived in Paris. Their relationship was marked by intense fascination and equally intense conflict. Fernande saw Picasso not as the myth he would become but as a young, struggling artist wrestling with insecurity and ambition. She offered companionship and grounding at a time when he was defining himself, yet their home was also a crucible of jealousy, possessiveness, and emotional volatility. It was Fernande who appears in countless tender yet melancholic portraits from this phase, softly modeled faces, graceful gestures, and warm palettes, each capturing both affection and unease. When she left him, Picasso's emotional landscape shifted again, preparing the ground for new transformations. His next monumental relationship began unexpectedly, with the poised and elegant Russian ballerina Olga Koklova. Picasso's involvement with her represented a complete departure from the bohemian world he had inhabited with Fernande. With Olga, he entered respectable bourgeois society, formal dinners, lavish homes, and structured routines. This new way of living, though restrictive in many ways, inspired Picasso's neoclassical phase, characterized by monumental figures, serene outlines, and a return to clarity and balance. Olga's presence brought stability and order, but it also introduced tensions rooted in different backgrounds, expectations, and values. Their marriage deteriorated under the strain of Picasso's artistic restlessness and extramarital affairs, and eventually the portraits of Olga shifted from serene classical elegance to fractured, anguished distortions, reflecting the disintegration of their emotional bond. During his marriage to Olga, Picasso began a relationship with Marie-Therese Walter, a young woman whose presence ignited one of the most sensuous and euphoric periods of his artistic life. Marie-Therese's influence is unmistakable, flowing curves, sunlit colors, voluptuous forms, and a radiant vitality saturate the works from this era. She represented youth, spontaneity, and a dreamlike serenity that counterbalanced the emotional strain of Picasso's domestic life. Her portraits glow with a kind of hypnotic tranquility, gentle, rounded shapes and harmonious palettes that evoke peace and pure physical presence. Yet even this seemingly idyllic relationship contained undercurrents of secrecy, power imbalance, and emotional dependency, elements that later manifested in the darker tonalities and increasingly assertive lines of his portraits of her. In stark contrast to Marie-Therese's softness stood Dora Maar, the brilliant surrealist photographer and painter whose intellect matched Picasso's in a way few others did. Dora was not a passive muse, she was an artist with her own vision, her own creative voice, and a capacity for emotional intensity that both fascinated and challenged Picasso. Their relationship unfolded during one of the most turbulent historical moments of the 20th century, the Spanish Civil War and the approach of World War II, and Dora's presence shaped some of the most powerful political and psychological works Picasso ever produced. Her influence is etched into the tortured angles, jagged fragments, and anguished expressions of the Weeping Woman series, where Picasso translated not just Dora's sorrow but the collective trauma of a fractured world. Their relationship, however, became a crucible for emotional suffering, marked by manipulation, obsessive attachment, and spiraling turmoil. Dora once said that Picasso's portraits of her were the real me, but those images also reveal Picasso's own inner fractures, projected outward through her form. After Dora came Françoise Gillet, one of the few women who maintained both artistic autonomy and emotional resilience in her relationship with Picasso. Younger yet remarkably self-assured, Gillet entered Picasso's life during a time of renewed experimentation and exhaustion. She brought clarity, independence, and a steadiness that Picasso needed but did not always respect. Their relationship produced works filled with bright colors, simplified forms, and a sense of optimism often absent from his previous phases. Gillet, however, refused to be consumed by Picasso's emotional gravity, and ultimately she left him, a decision that shocked him more deeply than he admitted. She later wrote a memoir that remains one of the most insightful, unsentimental analyses of Picasso's character and artistic process. As Picasso aged and formed new relationships, including with Jacqueline Roque, who would become his second wife, his dynamic with women continued to fuel his artistic transformations. Jacqueline's presence corresponds to late works marked by intensity, rapid production, and an oscillation between violence and serenity. She was fiercely devoted to him, stabilizing his final years while also being drawn into the emotional labyrinth of his personality. After his death, she protected his legacy with almost religious fervor. Across these relationships, a pattern emerges. Picasso sought in women not only love or companionship but psychological and artistic stimulus. Each partner became a prism through which he refracted new visions of humanity. Their faces, bodies, temperaments, and emotional complexities became frameworks for exploring identity, desire, fear, transformation, and the limits of human connection. His relationships were rarely gentle and never simple, but they were profoundly generative. Producing some of the most iconic and influential works of the 20th century, Picasso's personal life cannot be separated from his art because the two were structurally intertwined. His emotions, conflicts, passions, and contradictions were the raw material of his creativity. The women in his life were, in different ways, co-creators, not because they painted his canvases but because they shaped the emotional and psychological worlds from which those canvases emerged. Their presence changed the angles of his lines, the rhythm of his brushstrokes, the weight of his shadows, the architecture of his abstractions. Through them, Picasso explored tenderness, ecstasy, rage, despair, eroticism, oppression, liberation, and the depths of human vulnerability. The result is a body of work that feels as alive, conflicted, and multifaceted as life itself, a testament to the powerful, often turbulent intersections between love, art, and the ungovernable forces of human emotion.